The signal had been screaming into empty space for 12,000 years. Station keeper. Vel of the Cure in deep space monitoring. Array almost deleted it. His job involved cataloging stellar drift and the occasional cometary discharge. Ancient radiation spikes were common. Most meant nothing, but this one had structure. He sat in his fluid gel chair, 3 of his 4 manipulator limbs hovering over the console. The signal repeated every 47 standard cycles. The waveform wasn't natural decay or stellar interference. It was compressed data with encryption layers, so deepest scanners choked trying to parse them. Supervisor, he said, his voice clicking through the stations. Calm, I have something. Supervisor Merwin arrived 90 ticks later. Her iridescent carapace dulled with exhaustion. She had been overseeing the array for 14 cycles and had never once seen anything worth her attention. Degraded signal from the dead crescent. Vel explained, projecting the waveform. Sector 7, no stellar bodies, no trade routes, no recorded civilizations. The region was sterilized during the first Silence War. Marin's antenna twitched. Then its residual discharge from that conflict. File it and return to its not military encryption. Supervisor, I've run the comparison against every known Marshall cipher in the archive. This is older and different. He played a segment. The sound that emerged made Marin's movement stop completely. It was a voice, not a digital translation or an algorithmic pattern. A living voice, compressed and battered by millennia of radiation interference, but unmistakably organic. The language was impossible. No translation matrix could touch it, but the emotion behind the words needed no translation. Fear, desperation, and something else. Defiance. Marin's third ID'd. Send it to the council. Let them argue about it for another 12,000 cycles, but Vel had already run another scan, one that made his gel chamber run cold. Supervisor, the signal isn't coming from a ship or a station. Then what? He pulled up the source coordinates. The data made no sense. The signal originated from a point in space where no mass should exist, where no mass could exist. The dead crescent had been swept clean by weapons that broke physics over their knees. And yet, something was there. The signal is coming from inside the quarantine zone. Vel said something survived. Marin stood frozen for 3 full ticks. Then she opened a priority channel to the Surin home world, 3 light years away, aboard a human research vessel called Quiet Ocean. Dr. Helena Vance was drinking cold coffee and reviewing stellar seagraphy data when her console flagged an anomaly. She almost ignored it. The Quiet Ocean was a survey ship, not a military asset. Her job involved mapping gravitational anomalies and cataloging gas giant compositions. She had been in space for 11 months and had grown accustomed to false readings, but this one had a pattern she recognized, not from alien databases, from her grandmother. Helena's grandmother had been a linguist, specializing in dead human languages. She used to recite fragments of ancient texts at bedtime, Latin, Sumerian, Proto-Indo-European. She taught Helena to hear the ghosts in the sounds. The alien signal had that same ghost. She isolated the voice segment and ran it through the ship's linguistic analysis software. The computer returned a failure within seconds. Unknown language, no structural parallels to any recorded alien tongue. But Helena didn't need the computer. She Listen to the fragment 5 times. Then 10. The vowel placements, the consonant clusters, the way the speaker stressed certain syllables, even through the degradation. She pulled up her grandmother's old research files from the ship's cultural archive. Ancient human language. Reconstruction, phonetic evolution. Patterns, the root structures of forgotten earth tongues. Her hands shook as she made the comparison. It wasn't a match, it was the same. The alien SOS was being transmitted in a language that hadn't been spoken on Earth for 15,000 years. She opened a channel to Earth Command. Control, this is Dr. Hervance on quiet. Ocean, I need to speak to someone in military linguistics. No, she corrected herself, watching the signal cycle. Again, I need someone in historical archives and I need them now. The response came 3 minutes later, quiet. Ocean, this is Earth Command. What have you found? Helena leaned back in her chair. Outside her viewport, the stars looked exactly the same as they always had, but she knew with a certainty that settled into her bones like cold water, that nothing would ever be the same again. Control, she said, I found a distress signal that's older than every known species in this galaxy, and it's being spoken in Proto-European. Silence on the channel, then say again. Quiet. Ocean. Helena smiled. It wasn't a happy expression. I said humans have been here before, and whatever happened here, we left something behind. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 80 cycles. Ambassador Thal of the Vaughn Imperium stood at the central podium, his armored hide catching the chamber's cold light. Surrounding him, representatives from 17 species sat in tiered rings, each delegation's display screens flooded with the signal data. Analysis confirms the transmission originates inside the quarantine zone. Thal said the region was declared off-limits by unanimous council decree following the first Silence War. No vessel has entered that space for over 11,000 cycles. Murmurs rippled through the chamber. The first Silence War had nearly extinguished galactic civilization. The enemy had been contained, not defeated. The quarantine zone existed because no one wanted to risk awakening what slept. There, the signal is ancient. Foul continued, degraded beyond practical use. My military advisors recommend continued observation from a safe distance. There is no reason to risk. The human delegation rose. Ambassador Marcus Webb was unremarkable by galactic standards. No carapace, no armored hide, no bioluminescent display organs. He was tall for his species, with close-cropped gray hair and eyes that had seen 60 Earth years of diplomatic warfare. He wore a simple dark suit. Every alien in the chamber went quiet. Anyway, Ambassador Thal Webb said, with respect, your advisors are wrong. The Vaughn representatives' eye ridges tightened. Your species has been interstellar for less than 300 cycles. Human, you cannot begin to comprehend the dangers that exist in. We've already sent a ship. The chamber erupted. Several delegations rose from their seats. A heated argument broke out between the Surin and the Dorn representatives. Someone demanded an immediate vote of censure. Thal slammed a manipulator limb against the podium. You violated council decree without authorization. You have no right to. The SOS was 11,000 years old. Webb interrupted. His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. That means whoever sent it has been waiting for help longer than Most of your species have been space faring while you debated whether to investigate. We made a decision. Humanity is not qualified to make that decision. Webb walked to the edge of the human delegation platform. His expression didn't change. That was what worried Thal the most. Humans wore their emotions visibly. Webb showed nothing. The signal, Webb said, is being transmitted in a language no living species should recognize, but we recognize it not because we decoded it, because our ancestors spoke it 15,000 years ago on a world you considered primitive and irrelevant. Humans were building civilizations and recording languages. One of those languages is the same language that sent that SOS. Silence. You're suggesting a connection, Thal said slowly, between humanity and the quarantine zone. I'm not suggesting anything, Ambassador. I'm telling you a fact. Something in that zone knows about us, and something in that zone wanted us specifically to hear that signal. Thal's armored hide rippled. Why would any entity want the attention of a species as young as yours? Webb finally smiled. It was a thin expression, almost sad. Maybe, he said, because we're the only ones left who remember how to fight. What's in there? The chamber dissolved into chaos. On board the last light, Captain Idris El-Masri watched the council feed from his command chair. His crew of 42 humans worked around him, running final checks on propulsion and weapon systems. The ship was fast, lightly armed and crewed by volunteers who had signed up without knowing the full mission. They knew now. Sublight engines online, reported Lieutenant Sar. From navigation, transition to insertion point in 14 minutes. Council still arguing. Came the voice of Communications Officer Diego Reyes. Ambassador, Webb is holding them off, but the Vaughn are pushing for a resolution to recall us. Let them argue, El-Masri said. His eyes never left the main view screen ahead of the ship. The void changed. Stars grew sparse. The background radiation climbed. They were approaching the edge of the quarantine zone. Captain N said, her voice tightening. I'm picking up debris fields, lots of them. Metal composition doesn't match any known alloy, and there's a lot of it spreading out for millions of kilometers. El-Masri stood. Show me. The view screen zoomed. What he saw made his stomach clench. Ships, thousands of them, tens of thousands, wrecked, shattered, drifting in a graveyard that stretched as far as sensors could reach. The battle that had created this field must have involved millions of vessels. Some of the wreckage was fused into massive tangles, the metal twisted by forces NAR's instruments couldn't identify. My God, Ray whispered. Keep going, El-Masri ordered. They pushed deeper into the zone. The debris grew thicker. Then the sensors picked up something new, a structure massive. Impossible, Captain N said, her voice barely steady. I'm reading a solid object ahead. Dimensions are, they're not making sense. It's the size of a small moon. No larger. My instruments can't get a full return. El-Masri gripped the armrests of his chair, put it on screen. The image resolved slowly. The last light sensors struggled to process something so vast. When the full picture finally appeared, no one on the bridge spoke. It was a serpent coiled, made of metal and stone, and something that looked like frozen energy. Its body was formed from the hulls of thousands of ships fused together into a shape that was clearly intentional, a construct, a machine, a tomb, and from somewhere inside it the SOS was still Transmitting, Captain Ray said, his voice hollow. I'm picking up life signs, billions of them. In suspended animation inside the structure, they're inside the construct. El Macy stared at the screen. Somewhere in that impossible serpent, billions of beings had been waiting for 11,000 years, waiting for someone to answer. Bring us closer, he said. No one argued. Last light approached the construct like a gnat approaching a mountain range. Every sensor on the ship screamed. Warnings, radiation levels spiked. Patterns that suggested weapons. Discharges, gravity shifted. Unpredictably, the twisted metal of the serpent's body glowed with residual heat from a war that had ended before Earth's Bronze Age. Captain El Massey ordered continuous environmental scans. Lieutenant Nair navigated through debris fields that could shred the hull if she made a single mistake. Behind them, the quarantine zone's edge had vanished from long-range sensors. They were alone. How far to the signal source? El Macy asked. Ray's checked his displays. 20,000 km. Inside the structure, the signal is coming from somewhere near the center. Whatever's transmitting has its own power source. It's not drawing from the construct's main grid, assuming the construct has a main grid. Something this big has a main grid, Captain, and it's not completely offline. I'm reading power fluctuations all through the serpent's body, not enough to wake anything up, but enough to keep whatever's inside alive. El Massey processed that. Life signs still stable. Billions of them. Most are concentrated near the signal source. They're packed in tight suspension pods probably, but the power readings near them are different, more active, like something's monitoring their status. Like a caretaker system, maybe. Rays hesitated. Captain, the energy signatures I'm seeing near the signal source, they're not consistent with any power technology in our database. Not Surin, not Vaughn, not anything from the council races. What are they consistent with? Rays looked up from his display. Nothing we've ever seen. El Massey turned to the ship science officer, Dr. Aries Thorne. Thorne was the youngest department head on the last light, a xenoarchaeologist who had spent 5 years studying extinct alien civilizations. He hadn't spoken since they entered the debris field. Doctor, talk to me. Thorne pushed his glasses up his nose. The gesture was purely habit. His actual vision enhancement came from retinal implants. Captain, the composition of this construct doesn't make sense. The outer layers are made from salvaged ship hulls, but the inner layers are something else entirely. I'm detecting materials that shouldn't exist, alloys with no recorded formation processes, crystalline structures that violate known thermodynamic laws. Alien technology that used other alien technology as building material. Whoever built this, they weren't just advanced. They were desperate. They took the wreckage of their enemies and turned it into a shelter, a weapon, a statement. The construct filled the entire view screen. Now up close, the serpent shape resolved into individual components. Ship hulls, station sections, pieces of planets, all fused together with some kind of energy welding that had left the metal permanently warped. El Macy noticed something. Doctor, the fusion points, are they uniform? Thorne leaned forward. No, they're not. Some of these ships were fused together while they were still powered. Well, they were still fighting. My God, Nar whispered. They built this thing in the middle of a battle. Not. Built thorn-corrected grew. The construct is adaptive. It absorbed enemy vessels and repurposed them as defense nodes. The more the enemy attacked, the larger the construct became. It was a trap, a very effective one. The signal grew louder as they closed distance. Massey could hear it now through the bridge speakers, the voice, the ancient human language. He didn't understand the words, but he understood the weight. Behind them were being scanned rays. Announced suddenly, directed energy. Pulse from the construct. It's passing right through our shields. Damage? None. It's a passive scan, biological and technological. It's reading us. Bridge went still, 11,000 years dormant. And something inside that construct had just woken up enough to look at them. Masri made a decision. Open a channel, broadcast the same language as the SOS. Tell them we're here to help. Ray stared at him. Captain, we don't even know if there's anyone alive in there to hear us. The transmission could be automated, or it could be a billion people waiting for someone to finally arrive. Broadcast the message. Ray's hesitated for a heartbeat, then he worked his console. This is the human vessel last light, he said, speaking slowly, clearly. Directly into the void. We receive your signal. We came as fast as we could. For 30 seconds nothing happened, then the construct changed. Lights flickered along its surface. Thousands of them, millions, a network of blue illumination spreading through the serpent's body like blood returning to a frozen limb. The fusion points between the captured ships began to glow. The metal groaned. Power levels are spiking across the entire structure. N reported, something's waking up. Something was an understatement. The construct moved. The serpent's coils shifted. Not a fast motion, something. This massive couldn't move fast, but it moved with purpose. The head of the serpent, a tangled mass of ship holes, shaped into a crude approximation of a living creature, lifted from the debris field and turned toward the last light. One of its eyes opened. It wasn't a real eye, it was a sensor cluster the size of a city, glowing with the same blue energy now flooding through the construct's body. But when it focused on the tiny human ship, everyone on the bridge felt the weight of that attention. Then a second voice joined. The SOS. Not human, not any living language, but the translation systems locked onto it, immediately pulling meaning from pattern recognition. Identify. Massey didn't flinch. This is Captain Idris Massey of the United Earth Vessel Last Light. We received your distress signal. We're here to render assistance. The construct's eye pulsed. Identify. Human, Massey said. We're human. The construct went still. The blue lights flickered, and then for the first time in 11,000 years, something inside that impossible tomb laughed. It wasn't a happy sound. Protocol initiated. The voice said, the enemy Raytor NS. Activate defense grid. The construct began to unfold. The serpent uncoiled with the force of a tectonic shift. Massey grabbed his armrests as the last light shuddered. The construct's movement sent shock waves through the debris field. Thousands of wrecked ships tumbled in new trajectories. The blue energy spread faster now, racing along the serpent's body like lightning across storm clouds. Shields to maximum. Elma's reordered. All hands brace for collision. What's happening? Nair shouted over the alarms. Thorne's face had gone pale. The Construct isn't waking up. It was never asleep. It was waiting. The SOS wasn't a distress call. It was a trip wire. The serpent's head turned fully toward them. The sensor cluster that served as its eye focused with terrifying precision. Blue beams lanced out from the construct's body, not targeting the last light but sweeping through the debris field, cataloging, calculating. Then the voice returned louder now. Protocol confirmed. Enemy signature detected. DMS. We're not the enemy, Elmacy said, but he knew it wouldn't matter. The construct had been built to recognize one thing: the species that had fought the first Silence War, and somehow it had just identified humanity as that species. We need to get closer to the signal source, Thorne said urgently. The transmission isn't coming from the construct's defense systems. It's coming from inside, from the survivors. Rays, can you pinpoint it? Rays worked his console with trembling fingers. The signal is originating from a chamber near the construct's core. There's a power source there, massive. It's been feeding the SOS for 11,000 years, but the construct's defense grid is activating around it. In 10 minutes, that chamber will be sealed behind enough firepower to destroy a planet. Then we have 9 minutes to get there. Elm Massery turned to Nair. Take us in fast and unpredictable. If this thing thinks we're the enemy, let's not make it easy for them. The last light accelerated toward the serpent's open mouth. Blue energy lashed out, targeting beams. Warning shots. The construct wasn't firing to kill yet. It was testing, confirming 11,000 years of dormancy, made for slow threat assessment. Defense batteries are online. Rays reported they're targeting our engine assembly. If we take a hit there, we won't. Nair through the ship into a spiraling descent. The last light twisted between pieces of wreckage, through gaps in the serpent's coiled body, past fusion points still glowing with residual heat. Alarm screamed. The hall groaned. Then they were inside. The construct's interior was a cathedral of war. Enormous chambers carved from fused ship holes lit by the blue energy pulsing through the walls. Tunnels big enough to fly a cruiser through, and everywhere evidence of battle. Scorch marks, penetration holes, sections of wall that had been melted and reformed multiple times. The survivors are straight ahead, Ray said. 3,000 km. The chamber is massive. I'm reading over 2 billion life signs. 2 billion, the number echoed through Elmacy's mind. 2 billion beings had been waiting in the dark for 11,000 years. Can we open the chamber? I'm trying. The defense grid is locking down everything, but there's something else. The power source I mentioned earlier. It's not just keeping the survivors alive, it's communicating with something. Communicating with what? Ray's voice dropped. I don't know, but it's not local. The signal is going somewhere outside the construct, outside the quarantine zone. Thorne stiffened. Captain, if that signal reaches whoever the construct was built to fight, it already has. The voice returned. Different this time, not the constructs. Automated systems, something older. Something with intent. You came back. Massery exchanged a look with Thorne. Identify yourself. I am the archive. I am the memory of the fallen. I'm the last voice of the species you abandoned. We didn't abandon anyone. We didn't even know you existed. Lies. Your ancestors fought beside us. Your ancestors built this prison with us. Your ancestors left us here to guard it while they fled. And now you return, wearing different faces, speaking different words but carrying the same blood. The blue lights in the walls intensified. The chamber ahead of them began to open slowly, reluctantly. Enter, the archive said. See what you created, see what you left behind, and then explain to the sleeping billions why humanity forgot them. The doors opened. Inside was a sea of suspension. Pods, millions of them stretching as far as the eye could see, stacked in formations that defied gravity, glowing with the soft blue light of preservation. Each pod held a figure, humanoid, featureless, sleek, and at the center of the sea, suspended in a column of light, was a single figure, larger than the others, more defined. Its eyes were closed, but its mouth was open. The SOS was coming from its throat. The archive is a person, Thorn breath. That's not a computer system, that's a living being. They uploaded their consciousness into the construct. They've been speaking for 11,000 years. The figure's eyes opened, not human eyes, something older, something that had seen the galaxy burn. You don't remember of, the archive said. The council races don't remember. No one remembers the war that nearly ended everything, but the enemy remembers. And now that you've activated the protocol, they're coming back. El Masi stepped forward. What enemy? The archive's gaze swept across the bridge, taking in every human face. The one you were created to fight. The message reached the Galactic Council 2 hours later. Ambassador Webb stood in the center of the chamber as the emergency broadcast played. Every delegation watched in stunned silence as the last light sensor data filled their screens. The construct, the survivors, the archive's warning, and then the enemy. They're coming from outside the galaxy, Webb said, his voice steady despite the tremor in his hands. The archive identified them as the silenced, not a name the enemy chose for themselves, a designation given by the species who fought them. The archive species, the species in those pods. What do the silenced want? Someone asked. Destruction, assimilation. The archive wasn't clear on specifics, but 11,000 years ago they nearly won. Every species in this chamber fought against them. Every species lost. The quarantine zone wasn't a prison for the enemy, it was a shield for us. The construct was built to hide the survivors and generate a false signal that would lead the silenced away from the rest of the galaxy. Thal's armored hide had gone dull, and humanity triggered the real signal. Humanity answered a distress call. Webb corrected. The archive built the SOS to attract one species specifically, the species that helped them build the construct, the species that could activate its defense systems, the species that was supposed to return and wake the survivors when the time was right. Which species? Webb Metal's eyes. Ours. The chamber erupted again, but this time the argument was different. No one questioned humanity's right to be there. They questioned whether humanity could possibly be equal to the task. You're a young species, a Saurian representative said, technologically primitive by our standards. How can you possibly fight an enemy that nearly destroyed the combined forces of every advanced race in the galaxy? Webb didn't answer immediately. He waited until the noise subsided, because he said finally, we're not primitive, we're dormant, just like the archive, just like the construct. Humanity has been waiting for this moment longer than any of you can imagine. He accessed the console in front of him and pulled up a file. ancient Earth history, genetic analysis, archaeological data that had been classified for centuries. 15,000 years ago, humans weren't the only intelligent species on Earth. We were the survivors, the ones who fought and lost and forgot, the archived species seeded Earth with human ancestors after the war. They encoded the knowledge of the silenced into our DNA, into our languages, into our myths. We've been carrying the memory of this war in our blood since before we invented writing. Thal's eye ridges contracted. You're saying humanity was engineered. I'm saying humanity was preserved. The archive species knew they were going to lose. They knew they'd have to hide in the construct for thousands of years. So they planted seeds, species that would evolve, grow, and remember. Species that would be ready when the time came, and the time is now. The silenced are 11,000 years away at their current speed, Webb said. But the archive's activation signal is moving faster. We have between 6 months and 2 years before they arrive. He looked around the chamber at the terrified faces of species who had grown complacent, who had forgotten what real war looked like. The council has 2 options, Webb said. You can run, hide, hope the silence pass you by, or you can wake the archive species, arm them with everything you have, and stand with humanity. Stand with humanity. Thal's voice was sharp. What can humanity offer that we cannot provide ourselves? Webb smiled. It was the expression of someone who had been waiting a very long time to say what came next. Show them, he said quietly. On the last light, Captain Almasi received the transmission from Earth Command. He read it twice. Then he turned to his crew. Wake them up, he said. Rye stared. Captain, the archive said. I know what the archive said, but the archive has been waiting for 11,000 years. They're tired, they're scared, and they don't know what humans have become. In worked her console. I can route power from our engines to the suspension field. It'll leave us dead in space, but it might be enough to trigger the wake cycle. Do it. The bridge went silent as in transferred power. The last light dimmed. Life support flickered. Engines went dark, and in the sea of suspension pods the blue lights turned gold. The first pod opened. The being inside was tall, sleek, featureless, except for 4 eyes that opened in sequence. It inhaled, exhaled, looked around at the chamber where it had slept for 11,000 years. Then it looked at the human ship floating above it. Archive's voice returned, softer now. You woke them. You weren't supposed to be able to do that without the activation codes. We don't need codes, El Massey said. We have something better. What? El Massey gestured to the view screen. The golden light was spreading through the chamber. More pods opening, more beings waking. Some were crying, some were screaming. All of them were afraid. They've been asleep for 11,000 years, El Masri said. Their war, their sacrifice, their friends who died building this place. They've been carrying all of that weight in their dreams, and now they're awake, and they're going to find out that the enemy is still out there. Yes, but they're also going to find out that they're not alone anymore. Humans have been fighting and dying and surviving for 15,000 years. We've forgotten and remembered and forgotten again, but we've never stopped being dangerous. The archive was quiet for a long moment. What are you? El Massey looked at the waking billions, at the golden light spreading through the construct, at the faces of his crew, exhausted but unbroken. We're the species that answers, he said. The Silenced arrived in 347 days. The Galactic Council had spent every one of those days preparing. Fleets were assembled, defensive. Platforms were constructed, the archive. Species who called themselves the First Breath shared everything they remembered. About the enemy, tactics, weaknesses. The horror of fighting something that didn't negotiate, didn't retreat, didn't feel pain. None of it was enough. The Silenced emerged from a rift in space. That shouldn't have been possible. Their ships were black, featureless, silent. They didn't broadcast demands or warnings. They simply moved toward the galaxy's core and began to destroy everything in their path. The first battle lasted 7 hours. The Council's combined fleet, thousands of ships from 17 species, engaged the Silenced at the edge of the quarantine zone. The enemy didn't use energy weapons or projectiles. They used something else. Something that unraveled matter at the molecular level. Ships didn't explode. They dissolved. The Council fleet was annihilated. Thal survived. He watched from the bridge of his flagship as the Silence tore through the Surin battle line. Watched as ships full of his species turned to drifting atoms. Watched as the enemy advanced without slowing. Humanity, he whispered into the emergency channel. Where are you? The answer came from Ambassador Webb. Broadcasting from Earth. We're where we need to be. Hold them for 12 more hours. 12 hours? We don't have 12 minutes. You have 12 hours, Ambassador Thal, because we're going to give you 12 hours. Just hold. The channel went dead. Thal wanted to scream. His fleet was gone. The Von Imperium's military was gone. The Silenced were moving toward the inner systems, toward the home worlds, toward everything he had sworn to protect. But he held for 12 hours. The remnants of the Council fleet fought and died and retreated and fought again. They lost 12 more ships, then 20, then 50, but they held, and then humanity arrived. They came from everywhere, not from Earth, not from the colonies, from the darkness, between stars, from the hidden places that no one had thought to search. Thousands of ships, tens of thousands, more than the Council had believed. Humanity possessed. The ships were wrong. They didn't match any design in the Council's databases. They were angular, aggressive, covered in weapons that looked like they had been grown rather than built. They moved in formations that made no tactical sense. And they weren't alone. The construct followed them. The serpent, the prison, the tomb. It had unfolded completely. Now its coils stretching across millions of kilometers of space. The First Breath were awake. They were aboard the construct. They were piloting it. The archive's voice transmitted across every channel. This is the weapon we built. This is the weapon we never had enough soldiers to use, but now we have soldiers. We have humans. The Silence paused. For the first time since entering the galaxy, the enemy stopped advancing. Their black ships turned. Their sensors swept across the human fleet, and then they spoke. The TRS returned. Captain El Massey stood on the bridge of the last light, now the flagship of the human fleet. Around him, the ships of his species moved into attack positions. The plan was simple. It was insane. It was the only chance they had. Open a channel, he said. Raise. Nodded. Channel open. El Massey looked at the Silenced fleet, at the enemy that had nearly destroyed the galaxy 11,000 years ago, at the nightmare that had been waiting in the dark. You want to Know why humans answered that SOS? He said, "You want to know why we came? Because we remembered, not the details, not the history, but we remembered the feeling of losing, of running, of watching our worlds burn and doing nothing." The silence fleet began to move. "We're not running this time." First breath built the construct to hide, to survive. That's not what humans do. We don't hide, we don't wait, we don't forgive. The enemy ships accelerated. El Massey smiled. It was the expression of a species that had spent 15,000 years evolving into something the galaxy had never seen before. Humanity doesn't forget, and we always finish what we start. The human fleet charged. The battle was unlike anything the galaxy had witnessed. The silenced, unraveled matter. Humans refused to stay unraveled. Ships dissolved in escape. Pods launched. Formations broke and new ones formed. The enemy adapted and humans adapted faster. The construct engaged the heart of the silenced fleet, its energy weapons tearing through enemy ships even as they dissolved its outer layers. The first breath fought with the desperation of the resurrected. They had died once. They refused to die again. But it was the humans who made the difference. They didn't fight like soldiers. They fought like artists, like madmen, like people who had spent their entire existence practicing for this one moment. They used tactics no tactical database could predict. They sacrificed ships to save crews. They sacrificed crews to save worlds. They did things that made no sense, and they won not through superior firepower, not through superior numbers, through sheer stubborn, illogical refusal to lose. The last silent ship dissolved into nothing. At the edge of the quarantine zone, the human fleet, shattered and bleeding, gathered around the construct, around the billions of first breath who had finally been freed. Thals damaged flagship drifted toward them. He opened a channel. Captain El Massey. Howell Massey sat in his command chair, his arm bandaged, his face covered in dust and blood. He looked exhausted. He looked triumphant. He looked human. "We're not special, Ambassador. We're just stubborn. And we don't like being told something's impossible." Thal stared at him for a long moment. Then, for the first time in his species history, a Vorn bowed. The war ended. The peace that followed changed everything. The first breath emerged from the construct not as conquerors or saviors, but as refugees. 2 billion survivors of a war that had destroyed their civilization. They had no worlds to return to, no fleets to command, nothing but memories and gratitude. Humans gave them Mars, not Earth. Earth was sacred, but Mars, the red world that humans had terraformed and colonized and nearly abandoned, became the new home of the first breath. The two species built together, learned from each other, remembered together. The Galactic Council was dissolved, not destroyed, dissolved by mutual agreement. The old system, the one where ancient species made decisions for everyone, had failed. The silenced had nearly destroyed the galaxy while the Council debated proper procedure. Humanity proposed a new system, not a hierarchy, a network. Every species contributed, every species protected, every species mattered. The other species agreed. Ambassador Webb retired to a small farm on Earth's northern continent. He spent his days growing food and his evenings telling stories to anyone who would listen. He never spoke about the war unless asked. When asked, he always said the same thing: humanity didn't save the galaxy, We just answered. A call, that's all anyone needs to do. Answer the call. Captain El Massey remained in space. He commanded a new ship. The last answer, a joint human first breath vessel designed for exploration rather than war. His mission was simple: go where no one had gone before, listen for signals, answer them. Lieutenant N became the youngest admiral in human history. She commanded the defense fleet that guarded the former quarantine zone, now a memorial and a warning. She visited the construct once a year. She always left flowers. Dr. Thorne wrote the definitive history of the first Silence War. It was 17 volumes long and became required reading in every school in the galaxy. Humans loved it because it was honest about their flaws. The First Breath loved it because it was honest about their courage. The SOS never stopped transmitting. The construct systems remained active, broadcasting the same message into the void. But now the message had changed. It wasn't a cry for help anymore. It was an invitation. We are here, we remember, we answer. Other signals came in from distant galaxies, from unknown species, from places where the silenced had left their own marks. Humanity answered everyone. The balance of power had indeed changed forever, but not in the way anyone expected. Power wasn't about fleets or weapons or ancient technology. Power was about showing up, about refusing to look away, about being the one who answered when everyone else stayed silent. Humanity taught the galaxy that lesson, and the galaxy, for all its age and wisdom, had the grace to learn. On the observation deck of the last answer, Captain L. Massey stood with a young First Breath officer named Sayre. They were watching a nebula form, new stars, new possibilities. Do you think we'll ever face another enemy like the silenced? Sayre asked. El Massey considered the question. The nebula swirled, the stars burned. Probably, he said. There's always something, but that's not the question that matters. What does matter? He turned to look at Sayre, at the four eyes that had seen so much suffering, at the face of a species that had slept for 11,000 years and woken to find friends. The question is whether we'll face it together. Sayre was quiet for a moment. Then she smiled. The First Breath didn't smile often. It was a gesture they had learned from humans. Together, she agreed. The nebula swirled, the stars burned, and somewhere in the darkness between galaxies, another signal waited to be answered. The last answer turned toward it.